You're listening to the Pilot Boys podcast. This past Sunday, ESPN finally released the first and second episode of The Last Dance, which is essentially a documentary on the Bulls' 1997-1998 season. Obviously, it doesn't just cover that year. It covers Michael Jordan and Scottie Pippen, and in the future will cover Dennis Rodman and others and their lives and kind of how they got to where they became. But there are so many interesting storylines in the first two episodes. Obviously, a lot of there are things that we've known about or heard about that are just resurfacing, right, 20 years later. But it's also a lot of stuff that we didn't really know necessarily the details of, especially when you hear it out of the mouths of the people who are involved. So, first of all, before we get into like specific topics, what were your kind of overall thoughts on just the production itself?
I thought it did a great job. I think the guy who made this actually made the Iverson documentary, which is a documentary that was incredible. And actually that was part of the reason Jordan agreed to it, because I guess he watched the Iverson documentary 3 times. He does a great job of going from the actual what was happening in the now in the 97-98 season while having to tell Jordan's backstory as well. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And the way that he's able to do that and put that content together and frame it while also letting a lot of the voice and narration happen from other people, and it not just be a scripted narration. It's incredibly well put together.
Yeah, and if you look at one of the things that I think was interesting, and I think this is kind of always interesting to me when you talk about people who are that great or that dominant at anything, is the why, right? And we ask people that a lot on our show, is the why. And you look back and, you hear, clips from his dad and, from his brothers and his mom and from him and Michael Jordan specifically, and the things that he would say. And it really turns out that how he grew up had a huge, huge impact on his mentality and who he became, right? He was always trying to beat his brother, right? He was always trying to prove stuff to his dad who was always pushing him and never really always doubting him, even as a technique a lot of times.
And then also dealing with racism and how he felt like he had to prove himself because he was better and he wanted to get out of that place, right?
Yeah. And then also, having some adversity, right? Like, not making varsity as a sophomore, which, a lot of the players who are that dominant, they make varsity as a sophomore. A lot of them make varsity as freshmen. You know what I mean? So, having adversity that he had to battle through. And then he was obviously unbelievably competitive. And then he just developed a kind of maniacal obsession for winning. And it wasn't just winning on the basketball court. Obviously, it was winning in everything that he did in life, other sports and even little things, walking to the store, who gets to the door first, all those type of things. That's just who he became. And so I think that they shed a little bit of light on the why, which, a lot of us who are Jordan fans know, but for the average fan, I think it shed a little bit more light. But there are some specific things that happened in the documentary, at least episode 1 and 2, that I think we should talk about. One of them is kind of Phil Jackson, right? Phil Jackson is a figure that, as you look at now, he is historically great, right? A lot of people consider him the greatest coach of all time, and if he's not, certainly top 3 or top 5, right? That's not even a debate.
Yeah.
But if you look at how he kind of got to where he got to, he started off as an assistant coach that Krause brought in, right? And, someone that a lot of people did not know. And then he obviously developed and grew into what he became. What did you think about that part of the story, about the Phil Jackson part of the story, how it started and how it ended?
Well, I think it's interesting. We'll get to Jerry Krause probably in a little bit. Deserves a wider conversation. But one thing that was taken away from it is that he kind of found Phil Jackson, right? And it seemed like he gave him the opportunity and partnered him with the greatest basketball player, and essentially attached his career to Phil Jackson's. And despite that, and both of them kind of becoming successful together and getting to the mountaintop of both of their professions, with obviously having the best coach, the best GM, regardless of what people think about him, he was an excellent GM who put this team together, and the great player Michael Jordan, right? And to see how that went from that who you'd think they'd have a great appreciation for each other because they basically owe each other their success, right? The fact that at the end of that Krause was just like, this is your last year, and didn't even give Phil a choice in the matter. Just how a relationship can go down that path while you're becoming successful. It's not like they were failing, right? They had a falling out. They were successful. Is very, very interesting to me.
Yeah, and not to mention, I mean, you're talking about, 2 seasons ago, they had come off with the historical 72-10 season. And then, and then they won a 5th championship. When you're telling him this is your last year after they won the 5th championship.
Yeah.
Like, it wasn't just like, oh, they were having success. They were still a dynasty and still dominating. Michael Jordan wasn't necessarily in his prime, but he was damn sure close to it. And it just goes to show, and we've seen this in many other instances before, that isn't necessarily always the ultimate goal for everybody. It's just winning at all costs. There are egos involved, as you can see. There's money, there's contracts, there's respect, there's where different people are in their lives. And, winning obviously is great, but we've seen a lot of sports franchises and breakups, even Kobe and Shaq, there are a lot of them over history because of other issues. It's not just about winning. And so, and then one other thing on Phil, which I think is important, the reason why I think it's important that people talk about how he got there was because he grinded, and a lot of people say, oh yeah, well, if I coach Michael Jordan and Kobe Bryant, then I'd be Phil Jackson too. And it's like, no, you wouldn't. Because Phil, there's also a value in being able to manage those types of personalities, right? You have Dennis Rodman in the locker room. You have Scottie Pippen, who's unhappy. You got Tony Kukoc, who's a budding star. You have Michael Jordan, and not to mention all the role players, to actually manage that team consistently through 6 championships, and then go manage a Kobe and Shaq situation, and then a Kobe and Gasol, whatever
it's
else
a skill
situation.
set, right?
He's 100%.
He's the world's greatest therapist, right? That's what it's required when you're managing egos like this, because no matter how humble you might be, there's no human being whose mentality doesn't get impacted by being showered with praise and attention. And when there's a lot of attention around something, and somebody like Scottie and Jerry Krause aren't getting the attention that Phil and Michael were getting per se, it's definitely interesting to see how that fractures relationships, and at the core, everyone is kind of looking out for their self-interests. And if their self-interests aren't being met, no matter how good the situation is, it may not be good from their vantage point, right?
Well, that's the thing and we've seen that even later, when this wasn't really covered on Sunday, but what we also know is that, Kobe and Phil had falling out to different point. Mike and Phil had fallen out to different point. It's kind of like the Tom Brady and Bill Belichick thing as well, too, sometimes, is that, everybody, like you said, everybody has an ego, especially at that level of greatness, right?
Yep.
And, it's not that necessarily somebody wants to be exalted. There's certain people that want to be exalted as like superhuman and like godlike, but there are other people that just want respect, right? And so sometimes when people feel like, listen, I'm not saying you got to put me up here as a god, but you have to at least respect me, mention my name, which is part of what a lot of people are fighting for, which I think is a great actually segue into Jerry Krause.
Yep.
Because Jerry Krause is interesting. The reason why he was actually brought in, he wasn't a basketball guy. He was actually a baseball guy, but he was smart.
Very smart.
And if you look at his career, and if you put it in perspective, even just as a Bulls GM, forget everything else he's done, as a Bulls GM, he was successful, right? I don't think there's any way.
He's an outlier, right? Because the Bulls had never won. They're not the Lakers. They're not the Celtics. They literally had never won anything. Empty, and he came in and he constructed a winner out of nothing. He did construct it,
Yep. And that's the thing, is that I think his legacy is going to be complicated because, a lot of, just like people say in life, it's not necessarily always how you start, it's how you finish, right? And so the way he finished, at least in the eyes of the public, is as a disaster. He ruined Scottie's situation. He ruined Phil's situation. He essentially forced Jordan to early retirement. He, rubbed a lot of people behind the scenes the wrong way. and blew up something that potentially could have lasted longer, or at least could have ended more ceremoniously, right?
Yeah.
And so how do you put his career kind of in perspective?
Well, there's a couple things I think touching, based on what we were just talking about, right? This is a guy who was doubted just like MJ. It's so funny when you were watching it. It was like kind of the same thing drove both of these guys, right? Obviously Jerry Krause had physical limitations, being short, that Jordan didn't have, right? Jordan was a great athlete. But if you look at what drove both of them it was the need to prove that they were the absolute best at what they did as their profession. And I think what ended up happening with Jerry is that as they got 5 championships, he's like, wait a second, just like Scottie, wait a second. I put this team together. I made the trades. I drafted Michael Jordan. I got Scottie Pippen. I'm not getting any credit here.
And that's the quote that he said was kind of cut off, at least, was that, you can't win championships essentially with just good players. You also need, front office, and you need, other aspects of the thing to win.
Think about what people are saying. It's just like Phil Jackson. Of course he's going to win. It's because of Michael Jordan. But Michael Jordan wasn't the consensus number 1 draft pick. Scottie Pippen came from Central Arkansas. Not to mention Horace Grant. This is a team, and we talk.
And he made a trade. He made a trade to get Scottie too.
This is like he put together the team how Bill Belichick put together the Patriots, right? You constructed a winner out of nothing, because when Jordan first came into the league, they said that you couldn't build a winning team around this player. He was 6'6". It was the center-led league. I mean, he took a lot of risks and it paid off, right? So he does. And the problem is, again, instead of just waiting and taking satisfaction in the success itself, this necessity of people to always get the credit that they feel like they deserve, it's a hard thing to balance. So I understand. I hated Jerry Krause. I hated him because he broke up my team. You know what I mean? At a time, I don't think we've ever heard of a story quite like this one, where they could have probably won 7 or 8.
Well, that's the thing. I think overall, looking back, right, and trying to be unemotional about it, right, I think he has to get way more praise for creating those series of moments, right, for us, than he gets criticism, right? I think he obviously gets criticism for how he micromanaged certain things, and obviously, like you said, breaking up that team at a time when people thought they could have won a couple more. But in terms of what he did to actually construct and manage that team, and even manage the time when Mike left, right, to go play baseball and come back, I think he absolutely has to get more credit than criticism. Does that mean you have to like him? No, but I think that it's important that he at least gets that basic respect, which actually brings me.
He actually was wrong, right? He was wrong. Like, the organization doesn't win championships, and he didn't have. I think what he missed is that it takes everyone working together, and he
claims that's what he was trying to say.
Yeah,
and on some level, I think he understood that. But the real question is this: it's not everybody knows it takes everybody, right? From the trainers to the water boys to the ball boys, to the executives to players, right? Everyone knows that. The question is, how much does each one of those things get weighted, right? When you're talking about the responsibility or the the credit for winning, right?
Yeah.
And so I think he believes that his role should be weighted more than it was getting weighted, and maybe more than other people think that it should. And other people would push back and say, your role it was important, but it's not as important as you think it is. And that's where
your reaction can't be, let me break up a once in a generation type of talent and organization. Everything was flowing together perfectly in terms of the coach, the players, how the team was constructed. And he had this need to prove himself at the absolute worst time and be a king. I think he just liked the idea of being a kingmaker. I can make another Phil Jackson. I can make another Michael Jordan. No, those people don't just walk through through the doors, except for once every 100 years. And I don't think he
And
understood that.
and like I said before, I think that's kind of what Brady Belichick situation is as well. I think that's why people said he was so mad about the Garoppolo thing. He really did think like, listen, I love Tom Brady. He's great. I appreciate him. He's obviously the GOAT or one of the GOATs, but I can do this again. But I think one other thing about Krause that came up in the documentary, and not just Krause, but the Bulls ownership, was Scottie Pippen, right? And Scottie Pippen's how he came in, which first of all, his story was unbelievable. I mean, the fact that he, went to Central Arkansas, wasn't even on the team, right? At least he was practicing, but he wasn't even a player.
I mean, I've never heard of a kid growing from 6'1" to 6'7" after they go to college.
It's crazy. It's crazy because that's the question you ask. A lot of times you say, how did he get missed? How did the big colleges miss him? That's definitely one way. If you get to college and you're 6'1", and then you go to be 6'7". I mean, that's one way. But the fact that he, went from, not just that, he also developed a skill set and had a work ethic that was crazy. It wasn't just that he grew. A lot of people grow. That doesn't mean you're going to be great, right? And he just decided to work and dominate all the way to the point where he became the 5th pick in the draft. From a guy who was an equipment guy to forcing his way to get a scholarship to finally dominating in the NAIA, again, not even Division I, and making his way all the way to the 5th player in the draft. And there are a lot of top 5 players in drafts who don't become what Scottie Pippen became, and then becoming what he became. And then the big story, at least in this past Sunday, was his contract situation, right? He signed a 7-year, $18 million deal, and essentially said, listen, I signed that long-term deal because I wanted long-term security. I was betting against injury. I didn't want to, get injured and mess that up. And I had a lot of family to take care of. I think he had 12 siblings or something like that. He had his dad and one of his brothers were both in wheelchairs. He was trying to get, at that time, generational money that, made him insulated from a lot of other problems. And so it wasn't like he didn't know what he was doing. And the owner said, listen, I told him not to take this deal,
Yeah.
I told him not to.
I think throughout, one of the sad parts of the Scottie Pippen story is that it seems like this is kind of the issue. As talented as he was as a basketball player, he still was that kid from a town of 2,500 people who didn't have guidance in terms of what am I supposed to do with this type of money? How am I supposed to manage it? What am I supposed to spend it on? I believe he went bankrupt buying private jets, off that $18 million. He eventually got a $67 million contract. But I think what's interesting about this is that the difference between Scottie and MJ. MJ seemed to have the attitude that I do what I sign up for, right? Regardless of how much I'm getting paid, I'm going to do my job because that's what I want to do.
Well, that's one of the things that on social media that became a huge point of contention was when Michael said that he thought Scottie was being selfish there at the end when Scottie basically decided to wait to have the surgery and kind of sit out through most of the last season. Mike was like, yeah, he was being selfish. And then people came out and said, well, Mike was making $30 million. Scottie was making 2 or 3, that's selfish of Mike to even say that or be in another man's pockets and this and that. And I came back and, actually got a lot of interaction with this. I posted Jordan's salary. It wasn't until like in the 97 season, I believe, maybe the 96 season where Jordan actually started getting paid.
Other than that, he came back. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. He was getting crushed. Jordan was getting crushed salary-wise in comparison to other guys. Even there was a point where Coach was making as much or more than he was. And obviously, you try to handle your business behind the scenes. I'm not saying you don't go negotiate and try to renegotiate your value. I'm all for that.
Yeah.
But to say that Mike was just some guy, act as if Mike was just a guy who was just always making all this money, and that's all he cared about it's bullshit. Mike was one of the guys who played through anything. He played through a fucking broken foot. You know what I mean? So don't talk about, oh, he's selfish. No, he wasn't. He wanted to win championships, and that's what he prioritized was winning.
Yeah, and
period.
I think, and Scottie, it's funny. Part of what the goal of this series is to understand the difference between the GOAT and everyone else, right? Part of the reason Scottie Pippen is, a lot of people think, one of the top 15, top 20 basketball players of all time. There are a lot of people that will put him in that space. Yep. But his behavior during that time period and then during the playoffs when he got mad when they gave the last shot to Tony Kukoc, showed what the slight differences between Michael and Scottie. Scottie was a great, great player, but Michael Jordan was the captain of that team for a reason, right? And he kind of was able to take a guy that was great, it's just like a great coach, and bring out the best in him. But he clearly had some insecurity issues that were deep, that kind of played out. And also, what was very interesting, I don't know if this is true, but Reinsdorf actually telling him, this is a bad deal for you, but once you sign this, I don't let people out of contracts. You know what I mean? It seemed like he made that clear before Scottie signed the deal.
He said that he did, and again, Scottie was betting, making a bet that I don't mind that he made. Is like, listen, I need $18 million in front of me at that time in the 90s, $18 million guaranteed. That's from me, from Central Arkansas or from Arkansas, for, like you said, a town of 3,500 people. I'm taking that, and so, again, I think,
and $18 million is a lot of money, right? Let's make that clear. We see these new contracts, but $18 million is a lot of money, especially in the 90s.
Yeah, and again, I think, part of the problem, and Fabulous, the rapper Fabulous, he was asking this question last night. He was like, listen, when people sign these contracts willingly and knowingly with agents and lawyers, and then later on they're not happy, whose fault is it? Is it their fault? Is it their agent's fault? Is it the management's fault? Like,
100%.
you can't just say, it's messed up that the ownership did this. They're messed up. They automatically have to renegotiate. It's like, well, no, we all had leverage at the time that we negotiated. We all negotiated from a fair playing field. I didn't force your hand. I didn't put a gun to your head. You were an adult. You had an agent. You had lawyers. And you made this decision knowing the risk. You didn't get hurt, and you became great. And you knew that was a possibility when you signed this contract. And then now you're saying you're unhappy. It's like,
yeah.
I get, again, I get going to fight for your value and trying to renegotiate, but that has to be taken into consideration as well.
And the basic understanding of a contract, right? Like it's weird to me that when you go into a negotiation, how often people don't realize that you're negotiating with someone who's negotiating their best interests, right? Mm-hmm. That's essentially what a business contract and negotiation is they're going to try to get what's best for them. You're going to try to get what's best for you, and you reach a compromise.
And that's why legally, there are only a couple ways to get out of contracts. One of them is, were you under duress of some sort? Were you incapacitated? Were you drunk? Did someone put a gun to your head? Whatever. But once you're a consenting adult that they believe had adequate resources and ability to get competent advice and so on and so forth, then the courts aren't going to rip up a contract. It doesn't matter. Like, it doesn't matter if it turns out to be worse for someone than it is. If the market changes 5 years after you do a contract, that's something that could have been factored in at the time you signed it. So, again,
and then the injury part, I don't know I wanted to ask you what you thought. I thought him not getting the surgery was very petty. It's fine if you have beef with management, but you're talking about teammates that you've just won 5 championships with. To put yourself, like, at that point, it's one thing if it's early in your career, but this is the last season, right? And how important this season is, even for yourself, and you kind of make almost like a childish decision.
Well, I think it was petty, but I think that it was like kind of like that. I don't have any moves. This is the only move that I can kind of legally get away with, right? And so it was very petty. It was very childish. It could have jeopardized, Phil's last season and what they had built. But I felt like he was running out of moves. He was like, listen, they won't come back to the negotiating table. I'm not getting respected. They said he started verbally and berating and abusing Krause. Like he was on tilt. He was on serious tilt. And so, I'm not saying that as an excuse, but I do go to say that, it was the only move that he felt like he had left. And, you have to also take a step back and wonder, right? And just to, be fair and complete to Scottie. What the fuck was it like to be the Batman to Jordan, or the Robin to Jordan, to Jordan's Batman? Like, what is that like? What is that life like? Especially when you're a high contributor. You're not a guy like Steve Kerr that packs and just hits a couple shots. You're a guy who literally they probably can't win without, right?
Yep.
or at least not as much, right? What is that like day to day when you're walking and you're getting off the plane in China or France and people are running up to Mike and acting like you don't even exist? And I'm not saying people did that all the time. I mean, Scottie had his own shoe. Let's not go crazy here. But what is that like? What is that actually like? And what does that grow to become as you start to win more and more championships and start to grow more to your own? What is that like? That's got to be tough.
I mean, we saw what happened with Kyrie Irving, right? Like, he couldn't even handle a couple seasons with LeBron in LeBron's shadow.
Right.
But I think what made Scottie special is that humble beginning that he had in Central Arkansas. He literally was the perfect person from a personality standpoint to be MJ's Robin, right?
And that's why I love that Mike always
gives him credit.
Whenever he gets a chance, he always gives him this credit. And says there would be no Michael Jordan without Scottie Pippen. I love that he says that.
Yeah, and I think that's where whatever your issue is with management, right? You know that Michael appreciates you.
Mm-hmm.
It's probably his last season. You know Phil appreciates you. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And you have,
but he's probably getting bad advice too. He's probably agents, different people in his corner, his ex-wife, different people probably talking shit in his ear.
It's not easy, right? It's like just the pressure is real, and I think sometimes we judge people too harshly for making bad decisions in times of high pressure.
Exactly. That's you hit the nail on the head, because it was also probably a momentary decision. It wasn't like something he got to think about for years. It was like, I'm hurt now. Someone's probably like, yeah, just wait, delay the thing. If he could do it over again, he may not have handled it that way. But, the good thing is for him financially, he did end up getting big contracts and made over $100 million in contracts. And so good for that. But one other thing that was also really kind of interesting from Sunday's, part 1 and part 2 was kind of the cocaine bulls that they talked about, right? Which is widely reported for people who know and who followed it. But for people, the general population, I don't know if they know. I don't think they do, And so they actually asked Mike about it. And Mike was pretty forthright. It was actually more forthright than I thought he maybe should have been or even was going to be. He basically told a story about, I think it was his rookie year. They were at a hotel and, he went and he was looking for everybody. He couldn't find everyone. He went and finally knocked on one of the doors, and he heard people shh, saying, be quiet, So he knew that they were in there. And finally someone said, who is it? And he was like, it's MJ. And they're like, oh, okay. They let him in. And when he opened the door, crazy party. The line, he said one side there was lines of cocaine. The other side was the weed guys. The other side was, the girls. And he was like, I'm out. The whole team was in there. I'm leaving because I don't want to get in trouble. I don't want, if they come here, the police come, anyone comes, everyone in here is guilty. And he left. I thought that was, that was apparently indicative of how that team was. This is early 80s when he first got there. What were your thoughts kind of on that, that story and the whole kind of cocaine Bulls thing?
I mean, it was fascinating, right? If you look at what the Bulls were before Jordan got there, they talked about that too. It's like completely empty arena. I think they said that the minor league soccer team was selling more seats in the stadium than the Bulls. And when you're on a team that loses like that, right? These guys, we talk about this a lot. Why do people fall off the horse, right? It's like you're on an unlovable loser. You have a bunch of money and you're just going around the country every couple nights losing games, right? And so these guys will find other distractions and things that get them in trouble. We see that with losing franchises all the time. Think about all the issues the Browns are facing right now.
Mm-hmm.
But it was interesting because it showed a reality of what life was really like in the cocaine 80s.
Mm-hmm.
These guys all were young, they had money, and that was the lifestyle behind the scenes. And there weren't cameras and social media and reporters and smartphones everywhere where people could just capture everything. So these guys were able to get away with a lot more. And that's not the case anymore. So, but what was really interesting about it was just that the discipline it showed Michael having at 21 years old, because you're a rookie, you're trying to fit in with your teammates. For him to actually know that was not the right decision for him to make in terms of where he was trying to head in life,
mm-hmm.
and then actually walking away and and living a relatively boring life as a superstar showed that he was willing to do things.
Okay, hold on. Let's not go crazy here. Jordan didn't live a boring life. He was gambling. He was golfing. He had girls. It just wasn't that life that he was living. He wasn't living the cocaine Bulls life.
Yeah, he was living.
Jordan had fun.
He definitely had fun, but I do think at that point, like at 21,
yes,
he was probably a lot more laser focused. I think as his career went on and he came into himself and accepting he was the best player, he started having more fun. But what the takeaway was, this guy was just hyper competitive early on. All he cared about was basketball.
And the other takeaway for me for that time period was, for those guys' sake, thank God there wasn't social media, because, Steve Kerr talked about this actually after the show with Scott Van Pelt. He was just saying, like, he was talking about Steph Curry, for example. He said Steph can't go anywhere without 15 cameras in his face. You can only imagine what it would have been like with Michael Jordan and the Bulls back then. I mean, they had 15 cameras in their face. It just wasn't instant media like it is now, where someone has a cell phone and they can, imagine you have a whole team in there in one hotel room with girls in there with all have cell phones. You don't think something's going to slip on freaking Snapchat?
Oh, that can't happen. They were at the team fucking hotel, the team hotel.
Yeah, it's crazy. It's crazy that they got through that period of time. Guys now have to navigate differently. One last thing that I think was really, really interesting about the documentary was kind of Michael Jordan growing into his own, right? So I think, you heard things from first of all, somebody said that if the Olympics had happened before the draft, he would not have gone third, right? That he just, everyone knew. And then a couple of weeks into practice when he was with the Bull after he got drafted, that it was very clear he was the best player on the team. So Bob Knight saying, this is the best guy I've ever seen play basketball before he had ever even suited up. Then not to mention what he did, against, Larry Bird, one of the greatest teams. I think they were 67-15 probably that year in '86 when, the year that Jordan sat out 64 games and they barely made the playoffs. So they had to meet them in the first round. And the second game, he put up 63. Oh, what were your thoughts on kind of all of that, right? Just him kind of growing into just such a dominant player that everyone knew he was a great player and that he was going to be great, but becoming this was just, nobody saw that.
Well, I think at a certain point, everybody saw it, right? Because you had Magic, Bird, but there was a process that he went through to get there, right? Like James Worthy said that this is a Hall of Fame basketball player, by the way.
Right.
And he was going into his senior season, one of the best players in the country. He said that Jordan, within 2 weeks of practice, he was the best player on their team.
Right.
The guy just did. He had goals. He knew what he wanted, and he was relentless in his pursuit of it. And speaking specifically about the 63 points, like he did that without attempting a single 3-pointer. Could you imagine anyone in today's era even putting up 30 points without shooting threes? You know what I mean?
Right. And like you said, not even attempting one. It wasn't even not even attempting one. That wasn't what his game plan was.
And then to have Larry Bird, who, people who know that era know that Larry Bird is one of the most competitive, arrogant basketball players ever to play the game. And at that time, he was probably the best player on the best team. It was either him or Magic in the NBA, right? 4 Hall of Famers on that team. For him to say that after a playoff series in which Jordan lost, for him to say that wasn't Michael Jordan, that was God disguised as Michael Jordan. And then these guys had already won championships. And then Magic Johnson saying, we knew that eventually this guy was coming for us. That everything might not be right now in terms of the team. But these are the greatest players saying it was just clear that he was better than us.
Even Isaiah was in there. I was surprised to see Isaiah, who hates Jordan supposedly. He was in there. I mean, I think that was what was kind of amazing about it was that, you're talking, like you said, you're talking about Hall of Fame, top of the top Hall of Fame too, not guys who just squeaked in. You're talking about Bird. You're talking about Magic. You're talking about Worthy. I mean,
in their prime. In their prime.
And then Bobby Knight, who was, the toughest son of a bitch ever.
Toughest grade.
To say like, yo, he's the best player I've ever seen. I mean, that's just amazing. And again, I think a lot of it is a testament to the hard work and maniacal way that he approached basketball, right? It wasn't just, he wanted to play and win and practice and play and win and practice. And that's what he wanted.
And
That's it.
And he was doubted. Like people don't realize, even though he was getting that praise, he had just as many critics. Like when they showed the clips of all the centers saying that you're not going to be able to win without a star center in this league.
Yep.
And it's like he took that on and said, you know what? I'm going to be the first to do that.
Well, not to mention that, some of the things that they didn't necessarily say in the documentary, but things that we know is that, people doubted whether, even after he started dominating early on, they doubted whether his game was a championship type game because they said he was a ball hog. They said he couldn't play defense. He couldn't shoot three, all those type of things that later on he disproved and disproved and disproved. It was, those are, like you said, it wasn't unanimous. But there are two other things I want to ask you about before we wrap it up. And it's kind of like, for me, I think now it's impossible to kind of talk about Jordan or watch Jordan without thinking of Kobe and LeBron, honestly, right? Because just of the way people have kind of tried to compare all of them or at least lump them together. Kobe's is a little different. Well, two things. One, let me ask you this question before I get into specifics of the Kobe thing. What do you think about the people who are saying, look at all these slow white guys Jordan was playing against, the competition that LeBron and Kobe and even Kevin Durant, all these guys are playing against are now is way different and way more athletic. And, if they played against those type of competition, they would have been cooking guys the same level. What do you think about that type of comment? I saw that a lot on social media.
Yeah, I think people who didn't see Michael Jordan play don't understand just how physically dominant he still would be in today's game, right?
Mm-hmm.
As a 6'6" shooting guard. There's not a shooting guard in the NBA that could cover Jordan right now in today's league.
Mm-hmm.
So I think with him, people are always trying to compare eras. I think it's a mistake to compare eras. It's like the game was different too. Jordan had to deal with tougher defenses. The defensive rules were way tougher. The three-pointer wasn't as accessible. You watch today's NBA game.
You can hand check, you can foul.
Yeah, there's so much space in the game today. Imagine if Jordan was given that type of space to operate, right?
Yeah.
Like literally the Jordan rules, the Pistons game plan was to foul him as much as possible and beat him into submission, right?
Yep.
And it was legal.
Yep.
That was the game. So, and one thing you can do is extrapolate and say, would this guy's game compare to today's game, right? Jordan used to fly through the air. This is Superman. You know what I mean?
Right.
Like, and the way he made that free throw line dunk, no one's ever been able to make it look in the history of the game look like.
And see, the other thing too, and I think you kind of hit the nail on the head with this one too, is like, things are different. Technology is different. The availability of gyms and trainers and, new, people going to Germany to freeze their body. There's different things that guys have available now that you have to imagine if you could transport them, a guy to a different era, they would be able to avail themselves of the same thing. A perfect example of this is Jesse Owens, right? Yeah. So Jesse Owens ran the equivalent of like a 9.9, okay? And that was like the fastest time ever, pretty much at that time. And then Usain Bolt now, or, even before Usain Bolt, Carl Lewis and all these other guys come in and run faster than that. It's like, are they faster than him? I don't know. You know what I mean? Like, you have to imagine if he was in this time with that level of talent and the level of training, all that type of stuff. That he would
just the shoes and the tracks, right? Are better and faster.
Yeah. So I do think there is something to be said generally about competition, right? Like for example, a lot of the best athletes, or a lot of really good athletes were shut out of, baseball, for example, for many years. So how do you evaluate baseball in the 30s or 40s when you had guys in the Negro League who were better than tons of guys that were playing in baseball who weren't allowed to play? How do you evaluate it, right? So I get that kind of conversation, but it becomes a little bit convoluted. But the other thing
one thing I wanted to add to that before we jump off the topic is also just, you said the word competitiveness, right? Mm-hmm. It's like there were guys on that Bills team that were making less than $500,000.
Right.
So yes, I do think that, yes, players are bigger, faster, but they're being appreciated and giving the fruits of their labor in basketball specifically at a much younger age and in a much larger scale, right? Like, how would any of us act if we are Kevin Durant or LeBron James and we come into the league with $100 million shoe deals? You know what I mean? Like, and how does that reduce? And when you're recognized at 11, 12 years old and being told how great you are, Jordan and guys of that era, they didn't grow up being showered with accolades and AAU and shoe money from the moment that people knew that they could play basketball. They had to prove themselves.
Yep.
You know, and I think, I think that has an effect on the competition, if you know where I'm headed with that.
And that's why we love guys like Kobe and LeBron and Lillard and Russell Westbrook, right? Guys that kind of bring that same level of intensity. It might not be exactly the same. It doesn't have to be exactly the same for it to be powerful, but who bring that kind of same level of intensity. And that brings us kind of to the last point. When you see Jordan now, it's impossible. And for me, I've tried to stay out of the who's better, who's more talented debates. It doesn't matter to me, really. Obviously, I think Jordan is the GOAT. But I understand if someone says they think LeBron's the most talented player they've ever seen, or that Kobe is. To me, it doesn't matter, right? I think I just like to appreciate greatness. And I think one of the things that's happened, though, with that is that it's hard to see one or hear one without the other, particularly Jordan and Kobe, right? Because when you watch Kobe's game, you can see not just Kobe's game, Kobe's, God rest his soul. Kobe's mannerisms, him sticking out his tongue, the way he chewed his gum, the way he talked, the way he answered questions, the way he, obviously all the way to the style of his game. He exactly mimicked Jordan. And I remember thinking, and a lot of Jordan fans were like, get Kobe out of here. Like, you're just a knockoff version of Jordan. But the reality is that, and you and I talked about this in a different episode, what's so wrong with trying to be the greatest ever, trying to do exactly what the greatest ever did? That's what we were all trying to do. We were all on the court trying to do Jordan's
we were
moves,
wearing, I wore the grid knee brace, even though I didn't have knee problems. I wore the elbow pads. I did the fadeaway shots. Like, we all did that. He was the only one in the entire world who was able to want to be like Mike and pretty much 93% of the way get there.
Yeah.
You know, and there's absolutely nothing wrong with it. And Kobe is like, we were all mad at him during that time because we were Jordan fans. But once you were able to appreciate his career at its end, and you could see also why someone like Mike probably loved Kobe so much.
Yeah, and while he was annoying at first, he said Kobe was annoying to him at first, but then he obviously grew to love Kobe because he realized Kobe is me. He is me. And to the extent that there's another person that exists that is, obviously everybody's different, right? But to the extent that there's another person that is similar, Kobe was pretty much as similar as it gets when it comes to basketball. Yeah. And because, again, there are a lot of people who tried to be Jordan or wanted to be Jordan, but the thing that made Kobe able to actually do it, obviously talent, was he also had that same maniacal obsession. Waking up early, leaving the gym later, ultra competitive. You can't get there without that. You can't, So people, yes, you have to be blessed and be tall. You have to have good genes, all that other stuff. I get that. But to really get there to that point where you're at the top of your game, where you can score 82 points in a game and where you can win 5 championships, you have to really, really be obsessed. And then also to be able to literally mock Jordan's game. I mean, I'm talking about from his stance to his fadeaway to the way he flew in the air. I mean, there's a video that I think we shared before on social media of that compared Jordan and Kobe's moves over, it was exact.
I mean, the way the dude talked, like, when we were watching it yesterday and Farrah was listening to it, she was like, is that Kobe talking?
Crazy.
Or is that Jordan? Because it's like their voices, their cadence. It's like he sat there and watched how he talked. And I'm guilty of this too. I read every single book, every article. I know you were crazy about Jordan too. Like, It was a different time. Every
Not
video.
to mention, Kobe was a teenager when he was doing
He
this,
was our
learning his
age.
game, right? Yeah. So it wasn't like he was like 30 and decided, okay, hey, let me try to, he was modeling his game after who the greatest person was in that league, and he literally succeeded. And I think I can't wait. I hope, with technology the way it is now, I'm sure this is true. But 20 years from now, I hope we get another, a video or a documentary just like this on Kobe and one on LeBron. I think those are going to be exceptional because they both have exceptional stories as well.
I think, and this is the issue that I have sometimes with the comparisons between LeBron, Kobe, and Jordan. I think Kobe and Jordan definitely belong in the same conversation, right? They're similar personalities. LeBron's greatness isn't solely defined by what he's accomplished as a basketball player, right? There's so many other things that he has interests in that he's showed an ability to be successful in. Like for Jordan and Kobe during their careers, it was basketball is all I care about. And this is what I'm going to spend 95% of my working time doing. Whatever they do in their personal time is up to them. But what LeBron has done is to be able to succeed at the level that he succeeded at while maintaining a strong role in his family, right? While being a CEO.
And through the social media era.
And through the social media. It's a different definition of success. They're equally great. But as a basketball player, there's a reason Michael Jordan was willing to make certain sacrifices that I don't think any other human being in the world, other than probably Kobe, was willing to make to be the greatest basketball player in the world.
And I'm not saying that, I think, it's just even hearing Mike talk about basketball now, like you could tell right now he's raging inside, burning desire to like wish he was 25 again, to go out and bust people's ass in this league. You can tell that that's something that he is going to take with him to his grave, and maybe to a fault, but it is something that even still to this day is burning inside of him. And that's one reason why this documentary series is so powerful. First of all, obviously Michael Jordan, being the GOAT and all that type of stuff is one thing. The Bulls having one of the greatest dynasties, another thing. But you also had a lot of different parts of this thing that I think are interesting. Obviously, the Dennis Rodman episodes are coming up. That could be a whole documentary in and of itself. There are other aspects of this thing that are important. The passing of the torch, like we talked about a little bit from Bird and Magic to Mike, and the Jordan rules that the Pistons had, and like you said, Rodman and Pippen, and then Kukoc coming in, and then the Phil Jackson. Like there are a lot of different things about this that are interesting beyond just the greatness of Michael Jordan. So obviously we look forward to it. The next one is next Sunday. They're going to do episode 3 and 4, and we will continue to give these recaps because we are glued to this. Obviously, it's a perfect time for them to do it, given the fact that there's a quarantine and everybody's kind of home at the same time. So it's like finally, once, it reminds me of kind of the 80s and the 90s where everyone in the world was watching the same thing at the same time. There's only one channel on, you know what I mean? And it kind of feels like that. So any last thoughts on it before we get out of here?
Well, I just think that there's so much to learn from this documentary. I know a lot of this stuff, but seeing it again, we're witnessing like the birth of the modern game of basketball, right? Where we're seeing the power of branding now, the globalization of the game, the globalization of sports. Like the Bulls are the OGs, right? They created a lot of this, even down to Kukoc being the like foreign-born 6'11" guy, first player who's 6'11", who could dribble and pass and play like a point guard, who wasn't from America, right? There's so many different things about this team, to not having a traditional center being the centerpiece of the team. There's just so much that I'm learning by comparing what was happening then to the game now and everything in between, right?
Yeah, I think the last thing that I'll say is one of the things that's been most interesting to me during this time period is kind of reintroducing Jordan, or introducing, not even reintroducing, introducing Jordan to some of the populace now. They're young kids. I saw this on social media a lot. People are asking their kids, do you know who Michael Jordan is? And one of the kids answered, oh yeah, he's the guy from Space Jam, or the other person saying like, oh yeah, he's the guy with the cool shoes. And I think Nike released like some sick Jordan 5s yesterday, right on time, of course, right? But just kind of how he's being introduced and reintroduced to the population. There's stories saying that Jordan is going to become the most popular basketball player again.
If you're 35 or under, which is probably, I don't have the numbers in front of me, but it's just a significant part of the population, you probably never even watched him play.
I would say 30 or 25 and under, right? If you're 35, then you were born, what, in 85?
If you were 7 years old in 97, 98.
Yeah, but I'm saying if you were 35, you were born in 85. So that means by the time you're 97, 98, you're 11, 12.
So 30.
You got to be like probably 30 or under.
30 and under for sure. 30,
yeah, 30 and under. You probably saw a little bit of the end. You're a kid, didn't see a ton. Saw highlights and probably, knew a little bit. But for sure, if you're 20 or 20, 20 and under, which is, again, is a significant proportion of the population, he wasn't even a thought by the time you started watching basketball.
Think about the number of kids that we know that we've talked to that wear Jordan shoes that have no idea who he is.
And that's another thing. That's part of me is excited for him to get reintroduced, right? Because, there's the other thing, too, about Jordan, and this is the last thing, sorry, is that, when you look at some of the old clips of basketball, in the 40s and 50s, and even some of the guys like, Bill Russell, some of the stuff, it's not that exciting.
No, it's not. Let's be real about it. Let's be real. Let's just keep it real. Like, Will Chamberlain scored 100 points, but he was just dunking on everyone, right?
It's not that exciting. It's not. You look at it as black and white. You don't really see a ton of athleticism around. It's he's great. And
the swag, the cool element, right?
That's the thing. Yeah.
It's like he made cool. You know what I mean? In basketball.
Yep.
Basketball culture and basketball, juice is different. And he kind of created that juice.
Absolutely.
And it's like I feel like knowing about him as a basketball player is like knowing about Einstein as a brilliant mind. You have to know about them and who they are and how they defined our lives,
Absolutely. And like I said, we look forward to obviously 3 and 4, which is coming up this Sunday. And we'll be watching all 10 episodes. And we'll be very sad when it's over. I think a lot of us are antsy now because it's like, we're used to that Netflix culture where you can just binge watch. But this is giving, creating a little bit of patience for us.
I saw it was produced. I saw Netflix was a co-producer of this show, so that's another thing I'm excited.
When it's done,
I'm gonna watch it like 6 times. So
right, yeah. All right, cool. So we'll talk later.
All right.
Listen to the Pilot Boys podcast.